This program is made possible by financial support from viewers like you.
What are you babbling about?
Shalom, shalom, my chaverim. Greetings, my friends and family, and welcome back, my fellow believers and non-believers alike, to Babbling on in Babylon. And in this episode, we're going to return once again to blowing the whistle on the UFO whistleblowers. For those of you out there who might be getting fed up with all of this here conspiracy theory podcasting, I promise this would be the last one in this installment, at least for now. Some of you might be wondering, what does all this conspiracy theory and UFOs and all that have to do with the Bible? Well, I myself, along with many others, have fallen prey to many of these deceptions that we've been discussing. And my hopes in making this series on blowing the whistle on UFO whistleblowers is to expose the lies and deceptions that lay out there in the conspiracy community. Now, don't get me wrong, a good majority of what used to be called conspiracy theories back in my younger days have turned out to be conspiracy facts. So that being said, I felt it was of the utmost urgency. Now granted, this here podcast is only getting about 100 to 200 views and listens here on YouTube, but that's a handful of folks that won't fall for the lies and deceptions of the enemy. Now, before I dive back into this, I just want to say, I'm not saying there's not no UFOs, that's unexplained flying objects, but I'm not saying that there's no extraterrestrials, and that is beings or life forms that are not born of this earth. Why, heck, the Bible itself speaks of the Elohim, the seraphim, the angels, the sons of God, and Yahweh himself, the uncreated creator. All, technically, would fall into the category of extraterrestrial, that being not born of this terrestrial earth. But are they little green men from other planets? Are they celestial beings bringing peace? Or are they agents of deception sent by the enemy? Well, you listen in and you decide. Let me know in those comments down below.
Life with nothing but a Bible and a bicycle, riding through the streets, spitting truth like a lyrical sniper. In this world of chaos, I'm breaking the cycle. They try to silence me, but I'm gonna hit the fire. Rage against the machine with every line that I deliver. Jesus is the King, breaking chains and setting souls free. Bible in my hand, moving with divine intensity. Nothing can stop me when I ride with faith and clarity. I'm on a mission, spreading truth, changing the reality. Just a Bible and a bicycle. Living life with nothing but a Bible and a bicycle, riding through the streets, spitting truth like a lyrical sniper. In this world of chaos, I'm breaking the cycle. They try to silence me, but I'm here to ignite the fire. Rage against the machine with every line that I deliver. Jesus is the King, breaking chains and setting souls free. Bible in my hand, moving with divine intensity. Nothing can stop me when I ride with faith and clarity. I'm on a mission, spreading truth, changing the reality. With just a Bible and a bicycle, on the revolution you see. And life with nothing but a Bible and a bicycle, riding through the streets, spitting truth like a lyrical sniper. In this world of chaos, I'm breaking the cycle. They try to silence me, but I'm gonna hit the fire. Rage against the machine with every line that I deliver. Jesus is the King, breaking chains and setting souls free. Bible in my hand, moving with divine intensity. Nothing can stop me when I ride with faith and clarity. I'm on a mission, spreading truth, changing the reality. Just a Bible.
This is Babbling On and Babble On, brought to you by Bible and a Bicycle on YouTube.
Back in September of 2019, a strange little ideal caught fire online. People jokingly, or maybe not so jokingly, proposed storming a top-secret military base out in the Nevada desert. Yeah, we're talking about Area 51, nestled in the Tonopah bombing range on the edge of Groom Lake, part of the massive Nellis Air Force Base complex. The place has been at the center of flying saucer lore for decades, and the whole Storm Area 51 movement took off like wildfire on social media. It was mostly a joke, people goofing around, talking about Naruto running past guards. But the government didn't laugh. They issued serious warnings and beefed up security. In the end, only about 1,500 folks showed up to nearby towns, and just around 150 made the trek to the gates. It turned out to be more of a quirky desert party than a real raid. But here's the thing. The government's no-nonsense response only added fuel to the fire. It made people even more suspicious. What were they hiding? And even though security around the base had actually lightened up over the years, the myths still stuck. Funny enough, the fact that Groom Lake was being used as a military airstrip wasn't really a secret from the start. The true nature of the site was kept under wraps for decades, though. In 1998, the Air Force finally acknowledged the location, but kept operations classified. Then, in 2013, the CIA released documents, maps and all, that confirmed what many had already guessed. Area 51 was real, and it had a long history tied to spy plane development. So by the time a bunch of kids started planning their alien-themed field trip, most of the mystery had already been peeled back. We've known for a while now that the CIA picked Groom Lake in 1955 for its U-2 spy plane program. The spot was remote, secure, and just right for testing high-altitude aircraft like the A-12 and the stealthy F-117 Nighthawk. Those strange things seen in the skies? Probably just test flights. Nothing otherworldly. But still, the alien rumors wouldn't die. Thanks, in large part, to a man named Bob Lazar. Lazar's story is straight out of a sci-fi paperback. He claimed he worked on reverse engineering alien aircraft at a hidden site near Area 51. Trouble is, his whole tale has been thoroughly debunked. Still, in 2019, he got a second win, thanks to a Netflix documentary and a high-profile interview on the Joe Rogan Experience. That podcast dropped in June, and by late summer, millions were buzzing about aliens and plotting to storm Area 51. Coincidence? Probably not. Rogan's show was pulling in something like 190 million downloads a month at the time. Talk about influence. Lazar's reappearance, amplified by filmmaker Jeremy Corbell, reached a massive audience. Rogan may have tossed out a few tough questions, but for the most part, he gave Lazar a soft landing. It's worth pointing out that the viral Facebook event popped up just a week after the Rogan interview aired. The connection seems pretty clear. Fast forward, and we got another man, David Grush, testifying before Congress with similar claims about the government secretly working on alien tech. Now, Grush does have legal whistleblower protections, something Lazar never pursued. Though, interestingly, the Whistleblower Protection Act was in place a full month before Lazar came forward. And unlike whistleblowers like Edward Snowden or Chelsea Manning, Lazar has never faced prosecution. That alone raises some red flags. At first glance, Gresh might seem like a different case entirely. But dig a little deeper, and you start seeing some familiar names in the mix. And here's where we start tying the strings together. George Knapp, the Vegas reporter who first gave airtime to John Lear's wild alien stories, also introduced us to Bob Lazar. Lear, by the way, also helped push forward Bill Cooper, another so-called whistleblower with a flair for the dramatic that we discussed in depth in the previous episode on this podcast. Make sure you check it out. From Knapp, we follow the thread to Jeremy Corbell, Knapp's protege and podcast co-host, who made the documentary that put Lazar back in the spotlight. And guess what? Both of them were spotted sitting right behind David Grush when he testified before Congress. Turns out, Grush had met with them beforehand, possibly even getting coached or prepped. So as we wrap up this third and final part of our blowing the whistle on the UFO whistleblowers, many of whom, let's be honest, are just blowing hot air, we're left with the familiar truth. Not everything that glitters is gold. The Bible says to test the spirits, to shine light on the darkness, and to seek the truth over spectacle. And when it comes to alien claims, conspiracy theories, and convenient revelations, it's probably wise to remember that some things are just too good or too weird to be true.
Are you tired of carrying the weight of the world? Do you suffer from chronic hopelessness, persistent guilt, or an unshakable sense that something is missing?
Introducing the Bible, the time-tested, soul-approved solution to the human condition. Not just another book, but a revolutionary life treatment backed by thousands of years of divine research. The Bible works naturally with your heart and mind to reveal your purpose, provide peace, and even reconnect you with your Creator. Side effects may include sudden outbursts of joy, unexplainable hope in dark circumstances, increased compassion and patience, talking to God like He's actually listening. He is. Freedom from fear, guilt, and shame. Radical forgiveness of others and yourself. Occasional moments of, wow, I really needed to hear that. A burning desire to love your neighbor, even if they play the drums at midnight. Not recommended for people who enjoy holding grudges, hate being challenged, or insist on being their own God. Results may vary, but eternal life is guaranteed with regular use. Consult your Creator before starting a Bible regimen. Side effects increase with prayer. The Bible. Ask your soul if it's right for you.
All right, let's clear something up. Bob Lazar didn't actually break the news about Area 51. He might have poured a whole lot of gas on the fire, but the match was already lit long before he ever showed up. Sure, he helped make the place famous in pop culture. He's kind of like the guy who jumps in front of the parade and pretends he's leading it. But naming Area 51 didn't prove he had inside knowledge. That name had already made its rounds among those who were paying attention. See, sightings of strange lights and unidentified flying somethings near the Nevada test site and Groom Lake had been going on for years, ever since the U-2 spy plane first took to the skies. These jets were flying way higher than anything commercial pilots had ever seen. And when they caught a glimpse of those shiny silver birds catching the moonlight, well, they had no box to put that in. Their minds reached for the only thing that made sense. Aliens. To quiet the chatter, the government eventually started painting those planes black. Out of sight, out of mind. But even then, Groom Lake had already earned a reputation as a hotspot for the strange and unexplainable, long before Lazar ever took the mic. Now, fun fact, Lazar wasn't even the first to spill the Area 51 name on TV. That honor goes to the 1988 show, UFO Cover-Up Live, a wonderfully dramatic slice of the Cold War-era paranoia. That's where two mystery guests, Falcon and Condor, yeah, really, that's the names they used, showed up in the shadows with their voices all garbled up like it was a secret agent movie. These guys claimed to be high-level insiders, dropping truth bombs about alien tech and naming Area 51 on live television. And here's where it gets even more curious. Many folks believe Falcon was Rick Doty, an Air Force Office of Special Investigations guy who was known for feeding UFOologists a steady diet of disinformation, basically a smokescreen ministry to keep the public guessing. We also discussed Rick in the previous 2 episodes in this podcast. Highly recommend you go check those out. If that's true, then the name Area 51 wasn't leaked. It was planted by the government to distract us from what was really going on. Highly classified aircraft programs, not little green men. Condor, the other garbled voice, might have been John Lear. Yeah, that John Lear, the pilot-turned-conspiracy evangelist. His voice, even disguised, has a rhythm that sounds an awful lot like his regular speaking voice. And guess what? Bob Lazar just so happened to have met with Lear a few days before the UFO Cover-Up Live show aired, and even marked it on his calendar as the day he watched Lear on TV. Oh, except, Lear wasn't officially on the show. Unless he was Condor. Before any of this hit the airwaves, John Lear had already been whispering about alien secrets at Groom Lake to George Knapp on Channel 8 in Las Vegas way back in 1987. So the big question is, how did Lear know the name Area 51? Turns out it wasn't divine revelation or an alien memo. It was just good old-fashioned reporting. Bob Stoddall, Knapp's boss and head of the news team, had been digging into the Nevada test site for years. He found a map on the back of a brochure for President Kennedy's visit that clearly labeled the place as Area 51. Boom! Mystery solved. The truth didn't fall from the sky. It was hiding in plain sight. So what do we make of this? Well, as the Bible often warns us, test everything. Hold fast to what is good. Just because someone talks in a whisper or shows up in the shadows doesn't mean they're bringing the truth. Sometimes the real secrets are boring, buried in paperwork, or, dare I say, part of a well-crafted distraction. And just maybe, the wild tales aren't about revealing truth at all, but about keeping our eyes off of it. So here's how Bob Lazar first ended up on TV, according to George Knapp. Apparently, it all started with a last-minute cancellation. Knapp needed someone to interview, so he called up John Lear, you know, the guy neck-deep in all things UFO, and asked if he knew of anyone interesting. Lear, of course, had a name. Bob Lazar. Knapp met Lazar in a news van parked right there on Lear's front lawn. Lazar didn't want to be recognized, so he hid in the shadows and used a fake name, Dennis. And then he dropped the big bombshell. Not only were there alien spacecraft out at Groom Lake, but he had personally worked on their propulsion systems. Yep, flying saucers, reverse-engineered tech, the whole cosmic enchilada. Keep in mind, this was back when the internet was still learning to crawl. So when this aired, it spread like wildfire on actual TV. People were hooked. Knapp could see he had struck ratings gold, and he brought Lazar back, this time using his real name. In the second round, Lazar got into the nitty-gritty, claiming he worked with antimatter reactors and was flown to Area 51 before being bused to an even more secret base called S4, tucked away near Papoose Lake. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. One of the little proofs people love to point out is that Lazar knew about EG&G flights, what folks now call Janet Airlines, that ferried employees out to the base. He also seemed to have a decent grasp of the geography out there, which impressed a lot of people. But if we look a little closer, like really test all things out and hold on to what is good, we find some red flags. The calendar Lazar shared with the screenwriter working on his story, it's full of inconsistencies. For example, it shows him making trips out to the area before he was supposedly hired. One entry even mentions blowing up an old photo of Groom Lake, something that sounds a lot more like a guy preparing for a story than a guy working at a top-secret facility. There are also a bunch of scribbled-out references to EG&G. When asked, Lazar said those were job interviews, but he couldn't explain why he scratched them out. Maybe he was researching them, trying to learn how these secret flights operated. Turns out, the Janet flights weren't quite as hush-hush as some think. In fact, one major slip-up in Lazar's story is that he claimed the flights left from EG&G's building, when in reality, they took off from a separate terminal at McCarran Airport, about 3 miles away. That might not seem like much, but it's the kind of detail you'd expect someone actually flying out there to know. Maybe he heard things. Maybe he knew people. But as we'll keep seeing, there's more than a few reasons to doubt he ever took one of those flights himself. And then there's Gene Huff, Bob's buddy and real estate appraiser. According to Knapp, Huff was there from the beginning. And here's the kicker. They were already talking about UFOs a year before Bob ever went public with his Area 51 claims. Back in June of 1988, Huff actually contacted John Lear, asking for some UFO research in exchange for appraising Lear's house. He brought Bob along, and Lazar claimed that because he used to work at Los Alamos and had Q clearance, he'd know if the stories were legit. Let's pause there a moment. This idea that anyone with Q clearance automatically gets keys to all the nation's biggest secrets, that's a bit much, as we've already discussed. Anyway, Huff and Lazar showing up at Lear's door, asking for materials, already sounds like two guys laying the foundation for something. Huff would go on to appear with Lazar in interview after interview, helping him stick to the story like a good wingman. But once again, that calendar of Bob's reveals something odd. Multiple meetings with Lear before the public claims ever began. September, October, November, right around the time UFO Cover-Up Live aired. But when asked, Lazar claimed these entries were about another guy named John Lear. Seriously? Come on now. I'm not a genius, but whew. It's one of those stories where the more you look, the more it starts to feel like someone's weaving a tall tale out of loose threads and scribbled notes. And yet, it worked. Lazar told Lear that after being skeptical at first, he'd suddenly been hired at Area 51 and showed all the alien secrets. Either Lear bought it, or he really wanted to believe it. Either way, the story took flight. Now, as Proverbs says, the first to present his case seems right, until another comes forward and questions him. And boy, there are plenty of questions. So in March of 1989, Bob Lazar decided to take his buddies Gene Huff and John Lear out to a spot in Tikaboo Valley. That's Tikaboo Valley. Why? Well, he claimed they could watch flying saucers getting tested out in the open sky like it was just another Wednesday night's miracle. Someone brought a camcorder, as one does, and they caught a shaky little light zooming around in the distance. But here's the thing. When you actually watch the footage today, it looks more like the light is just dancing because the person holding the camera had the jitters. Honestly, it's less evidence of aliens and more someone forgot the tripod. Now, people have tried to explain what that light was. Some say it could have been an experimental spy plane. Others suggest it might have just been the nightly Janet airline flight, which ferried workers to Area 51 like clockwork. And then there's a more science fiction-y, but still totally earthly theory. A radar spoofing particle beam. You wouldn't see the beam itself, just a glowing endpoint zipping around like a divine spotlight show. But whatever it was, Lazar's claim that he knew exactly when and where to see it has been used to prove he was an insider. However, and here's where things get grounded, plenty of local UFO fans already knew Wednesday nights were hot for strange sky shows. Norio Hayakawa, yep, the same guy who promoted Bill Cooper's lectures, even said he came out on a Wednesday because that's when we heard they did saucer test on the radio. So, yeah, Lazar wasn't pulling sacred knowledge out of thin air. His own calendar even showed he'd been out there watching the skies months before he ever claimed to get the Area 51 job. He told John Lear all about it. Seems more like a hobbyist with a telescope than someone briefed by aliens. Fast forward a bit, and Lazar's story really starts spreading. After his George Knapp interviews, he and Huff put together their own short film, The Lazar Tape, and excerpts from the government Bible. No, not the Bible, but boy, the title really wanted you to think it had divine authority. It opens with what might be one of the most unintentionally dramatic scenes ever. A lone sports car cruising across the desert, eerie music playing, and then out steps Bob, ready to drop truth bombs. Or at least story bombs. According to Lazar, he was a physicist at Los Alamos. Cue the mysterious credentials. One day, Dr. Edward Teller, you know, the father of the hydrogen bomb, was speaking there. Lazar says Teller saw him in the local paper, smiling next to his car with a jet engine installed on it. Because, of course, Bob had a jet car. Supposedly, this left such an impression on Teller that years later, after Bob hit financial rock bottom and was hanging around with UFO folks, he sent his resume to Teller. And wouldn't you know it, Teller remembered him and passed his info to EG&G. Cue the secret job offer. Now let's pump the brakes here. According to Lazar, he was hired, flown to Area 51, and bust to the ultra-secret S4 facility like it was just onboarding day at a tech startup. No big deal, just the government's biggest secrets. Keep in mind, legend says even the president didn't have clearance for this stuff. Yet Bob, who was broke, had just buddied up with John Lear and didn't exactly scream trustworthy asset, gets handed a clearance without hesitation. That's odd. Especially since financial trouble is exactly the kind of thing that usually disqualifies you from a clearance in the first place. After all, even in Scripture, a man who's faithful in little is trusted with much. But here, it seems like they skipped the discernment part. Then, just like that, Lazar says he was walked into a hangar filled with 9 flying saucers. No easing him in, no let's see if he can be trusted. Just, hey Bob, welcome aboard. Take a look at our alien collection. He says he worked on Project Galileo, which dealt with antimatter propulsion powered by gravity waves. Because of course. Then there was Project Sidekick, which involved some kind of alien beam weapon. And finally, Project Looking Glass, which supposedly let the government peek back through time. Yeah, like some heavenly vision, except for the angels were replaced by engineers. But here's the kicker. According to Lazar, not only was he working on these mind-bending projects, they also let him read classified documents about alien contact going way back in human history. No compartmentalization, no need to know. They just handed him the full scroll, like some modern-day prophet in the desert. Honestly, even Moses had to climb a mountain to get a glimpse of the tablets, and this guy just strolls in and gets the whole divine download? It's a lot to take in. And if you're picking up on how it doesn't quite align with how real top secret clearance works, or, for that matter, how wisdom operates in Scripture, you're not alone. There's something fishy about how easily this all came together. Maybe, just maybe, Lazar wasn't chosen to reveal cosmic truth. Maybe he was just crafting it. Lazar's story about Edward Teller has a bit of a shape-shifting quality to it. Sometimes he paints Teller as a mere consultant who barely dipped a toe into the world of UFOs. Other times, Teller is apparently the mastermind of the entire alien tech program. The only part of this whole tale that holds up is that Teller was, in fact, at Los Alamos the day after the local newspaper ran a story about Lazar's jet-powered car. That much is true. But the idea that Teller was running some super-secret saucer project? Nope. For starters, during that entire period, and for 6 years afterward, Teller was mostly focused on political activism, not deep space reverse engineering. His calendar, which is available through his personal archives, shows he was rarely even in Las Vegas. In fact, on the very day Lazar claims Teller gave him a call to recommend him to EG&G, Teller was giving a speech at Cal State Northridge. The university newspaper and Teller's own itinerary confirmed this. So, unless he was multitasking like a sci-fi telepath, Lazar's story doesn't line up. The idea that a scientist famous for inventing the hydrogen bomb would remember a guy who bolted a jet engine to his Honda 6 years earlier and immediately think, this is the man to trust with alien propulsion tech, is more than a stretch. It's downright cartoonish. Still, this is Lazar's golden nugget of evidence that Teller saw him in the paper, was somehow impressed, and later reached out. In the Lazar tape, Bob shows the cover of the Los Alamos Monitor with his car on it and follows it up with a clipping about Teller's visit, as if these two completely unrelated things happening on the same day proves that they had a meaningful encounter. At the end of the tape, he even includes a brief interview clip from 1990, where Teller seems to dodge a question about Lazar. Sounds suspicious, right? Well, not if you actually listen to the full context, which is hard to do since that interview snippet is clipped and cherry-picked to death, and no one has yet turned up the full version. But even in that short bit, you can make out Teller talking, with his heavy accent, about the feasibility of nuclear fuel for interstellar travel. He doesn't even mention Lazar by name. He just gives a generic, "That's all I can say," clearly meaning, "I don't really know beyond this." And when the interviewer kept pestering him, he responded like any of us would. "If you keep this up, I'm done talking." It wasn't some government gag order. It was a scientist brushing off a cranky interviewer. But even if, by some miracle, the Teller story were true, Lazar had a much bigger problem standing in the way of a high-level security clearance. His own backstory, or rather the patchwork of fiction and exaggeration that passed for one. This is where things really start to unravel. Lazar claimed he had master's degrees from both MIT and Caltech, which sounds impressive until you remember that people with doctorates are the usual picks for top-secret projects, not folks with master's degrees who built a rocket-powered Datsun. But the real issue, there's zero evidence he ever attended either school. None. Zilch. MIT and Caltech have no record of him. He doesn't appear in yearbooks, student directories, or anywhere else. There's no theses, no transcripts, no proof. What we do know is that Lazar graduated from high school in the bottom third of his class, and that he was enrolled in a junior college in California at the same time he claimed to be studying at MIT. When pressed to name a professor from MIT or Caltech, he couldn't remember, and then named someone who taught at a junior college instead. Not exactly helping his case. His 1980 marriage certificate even listed his highest education as 12th grade. So, unless MIT was secretly scouting high school seniors with subpar GPAs and a penchant for jet-powered jalopies, this just doesn't add up. Stanton Friedman, a respected nuclear physicist and UFO researcher, was among the first to call this out. He was skeptical, not because he didn't want to believe, but because he actually checked the facts. And Lazar's explanation for the missing records? Government cover-up. According to Bob, the feds erased everything. No school records, no diplomas, no classmates, no memories. Apparently, this shadowy operation was so thorough, it even wiped out his old yearbooks, and the minds of everyone who ever met him. But let's say that's true. Let's pretend the government is that powerful, and they did vaporize every trace of Bob's academic life. Even then, wouldn't Bob still have something? A thesis? A diploma? A letter of recommendation? A single photo from graduation? Something? Anything? Nope. He's got nothing. And weirdly, despite this massive erasure ruining his reputation, Lazar never seems to complain about what it's done to his life. No loss of job opportunities, no grief about student loans for a degree no longer recognized. Just frustration that it's made people question his story, which honestly feels more like an excuse than a tragedy. George Knapp, the reporter who gave Lazar his first big platform, insists he mention all these discrepancies from the start. And technically, he did, but that's not the same as investigating them. Knapp had Lazar on air in May of that year, using a shadowy silhouette to protect his identity. By November, Lazar was revealed, and Knapp was already pushing the idea that the government had erased his records. That's quite the quick cleanup. Much more likely, Lazar knew his lies would get exposed as soon as people knew his name, so he got ahead of the curve with the cover-up story. Knapp's defense is that if Lazar worked at Los Alamos, then obviously his education must have checked out at some point. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. That brings us to the next big question. Did Bob Lazar really work at Los Alamos? And was he even a physicist while he was there? Knapp himself initially found that Los Alamos had no record of Bob Lazar's employment. But after digging further, he uncovered a phone book from that era listing all Los Alamos workers, and there was Bob's name. Knapp presented this as evidence of a cover-up. However, that phone book also included contractors hired through the Kirk-Mayer Corporation, and Lazar's name appeared with the initials KM, indicating that he wasn't a lab scientist, but an outside contractor. Kirk-Mayer hired technicians for low-level jobs, which aligns with what we know about Lazar's background. His 1980 marriage certificate, for instance, lists his occupation as electronics technician. Later, researchers even tracked down physicists and co-workers from Los Alamos who described Lazar as a largely unremarkable employee who was eventually fired for trying to exploit the lab's toll-free phone system for a personal business. There's no doubt Lazar was physically in Los Alamos at the time. After all, there's that famous local newspaper article about his jet car. But it's likely he misrepresented himself to the journalist Terry England, just as he later misrepresented himself to the world. Knapp and Jeremy Corbell have leaned hard on the fact that the article called Lazar a physicist, and Corbell has even claimed that England verified Lazar's job title back when he wrote that piece. Yet, in a more recent interview, England clarified that he simply took Bob at his word and denied ever telling Corbell otherwise. What's perhaps even more telling is that Lazar was simultaneously running a photo processing business in Los Alamos. When he filed for bankruptcy, he listed the photo business as his occupation, with no mention at all of work with Kirk-Mayer or Los Alamos National Lab. If his role at the lab had been as substantial as he claimed, you'd think he'd mention it on official documents. Additional red flags pop up when you look at how carefully Lazar has avoided speaking with any qualified nuclear physicists, people who might actually test the depth of his scientific knowledge. One of the first experts he avoided was Stanton Friedman, who was not just a UFO researcher, but a real nuclear physicist. Ever since, Lazar stuck to friendlier terrain, like interviews with other self-taught enthusiasts, such as Joe Rogan. He's good at dropping technical-sounding jargon, but anyone with real credentials quickly sees through it.
Hey, real quick. Big thanks to everyone out there listening to Babbling On in Babylon, brought to you by Bible and a Bicycle. It seriously means a lot that you're here. If you're enjoying the podcast, do me a favor. Hit like, subscribe, and maybe share it with a friend who'd get something out of it too. It helps way more than you might think. And if you want to support the show in a bigger way, check out the links in the description. There's merch, memberships, and other ways to help keep this thing rolling.
Let's go back to that famous jet-powered car, the one that supposedly caught the eye of Edward Teller and launched Lazar into the world of UFO back engineering. Well, Lazar grew up in the San Fernando Valley, where he knew Eugene Gluharef. I'm probably butchering that. The guy who actually invented those jet engines. As a teenager, Bob had already strapped a Gluharef engine to a bicycle. That'd have been something to see. In the newspaper article about his jet car, he claimed the engine produced 1,600 pounds of thrust. An obvious exaggeration. Gluharef's largest engines maxed out at 700 pounds. And the one in Bob's Honda was even smaller. Again, just more self-promotion and overstatement. These habits didn't stop in the 80s. After Knapp helped launch his fame and before Jeremy Corbell gave it a second win, Lazar ran a business selling science supplies through the mail to teachers and hobbyists. In 2003, his home was raided after it was discovered he was selling materials used to make illegal fireworks and explosives. Wired magazine wrote a short piece about it titled, "Don't Try This at Home," and interestingly, didn't even mention his UFO claims. In that article, Lazar casually claimed he had a particle accelerator in his backyard. That's absurd. Real particle accelerators require kilometers of space and hundreds of megawatts of power. Think CERN in Switzerland. Lazar claimed his was powered by a Van de Graaff generator, which might produce a few million volts. Not remotely enough. And let's be honest, if authorities were concerned enough to raid his house over fireworks, they wouldn't have left behind a machine capable of creating high-energy proton collisions. A real accelerator would be far more dangerous than any homemade firecracker. The most prominent example of Lazar's supposed scientific expertise comes from his explanation of the propulsion system used by the flying saucers he claimed to have reverse engineered at S4. In his original video, he frames it like a simple science lesson for the masses. He describes a process where the craft uses a small particle accelerator to fire and collide particles of a non-earthly element, one he conveniently dubbed Element 115. According to Lazar, these collisions create antimatter, which in turn produces gravitational waves, warping space and time and allowing the craft to travel vast distances instantly. Now, let's unpack that. First, antimatter propulsion isn't science fiction. It's theoretically possible. But Lazar didn't invent the ideal. Physicists have known about antimatter since Paul Dirac proposed it in the 1930s. In the 1950s, German scientist Eugene Sanger suggested the use of antimatter in propulsion by harnessing the immense energy produced when matter and antimatter collide, known as the annihilation effect. But here's the thing, that reaction has nothing to do with generating gravitational waves. That's not how it works. As for gravitational waves themselves, they were predicted by Einstein back in 1915 as part of his theory of general relativity. Even the idea that space and time could be warped to enable fast or instantaneous travel isn't new. In fact, it was popularized not by a physicist, but by a children's author, Madeleine L'Engle, who adapted the concept for her 1962 novel, A Wrinkle in Time. If you read that book as a kid or saw the movie, Lazar's explanation probably sounds very familiar, because it is. He was basically paraphrasing mid-century sci-fi written for 12-year-olds. And while Lazar confidently described these waves decades ago, it wasn't until 2016 that scientists at LIGO, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, that's a mouthful, were finally able to detect them after years of effort and incredibly sensitive equipment. Those waves, by the way, came from far-off cosmic collisions between neutron stars, not from any secret craft flying around the Nevada desert. If the U.S. government were using spacecraft that regularly bent space-time right here on Earth, LIGO would have picked up on it. Another point often trotted out as proof of Lazar's credibility is the 2003 discovery, technically synthesis, of element 115. But predicting element 115's existence wasn't some extraordinary feat. Anyone familiar with the periodic table knew it was just a matter of time. Lazar, who worked at Los Alamos in some capacity, would have been aware of the ongoing race to discover heavier elements. That lab's Mason physics facility housed a powerful particle accelerator used for just such research. In fact, elements beyond uranium had been steadily discovered and synthesized for decades. Element 104 was achieved in 1970 at Lawrence Livermore National Library. By the mid-1970s, Russian scientists had added 106. In the 1980s, while Lazar was working as a technician, elements 107 through 109 were created in Germany. In the 90s and early 2000, the scientific community reached 110 through 118. The idea that element 115 come from an alien spacecraft ignores decades of hard, incremental progress in nuclear physics. One of Lazar's most repeated claims is that element 115 was stable, critical to his version of alien propulsion. But when scientists finally managed to create it, they found it was highly unstable, lasting only fractions of a second. That's not exactly useful for powering interstellar travel. Some researchers suspect Lazar may have read about the island of stability theory in Scientific American, which published articles in both 1969 and again in May 1989, the very month Lazar appeared on TV. These articles speculated that elements near 114 might exhibit longer half-lives. Lazar, ever the opportunist, may have simply adapted this ideal into his own story. Then there's his claim that element 115's melting point would be at 1,740 degrees Celsius. In reality, it's closer to 400 degrees Celsius. Another detail that doesn't line up. And while many people focus on 115, Lazar also made predictions about element 116, known as livermorium. He claimed that, when synthesized, it would decay by emitting antimatter. But when 116 was finally created, it was found to decay by emitting plain old alpha particles. Exactly what you would expect from a highly radioactive heavy element. No antimatter, no gravitational waves, no interdimensional shortcuts. Just textbook nuclear physics. Now, aside from all the shaky science Lazar puts forward, there's also the equally shaky evidence he offers for having worked at Area 51. And let's just say it doesn't hold up well under a magnifying glass. Let's start with the timeline. Lazar claims he got a super high-level security clearance and was inside S4, an even more secret part of Area 51, within 5 days of being interviewed by an outside contractor. Seriously, 5 days. Anyone who's been through a real background check, let alone for national security clearance, will tell you that's just not how it works. But meanwhile, Bob supposedly gets walked into a top-secret alien research program like it's a temp job. And what does Lazar present to prove he was there? An ID badge and a W-2. Let's talk about the badge first. It has the letters MAJ, which he claims refers to Majestic Clearance, the highest clearance level, he says. Now, anyone who's been following UFO lore will recognize that as a blatant nod to the Majestic 12 hoax, based on some very obviously forged documents from the 1980s. But let's set that aside for a second. People who actually worked at Area 51 have since come forward and said the badges at the time should have said Wackenhut, the private security contractor in charge back then, not MAJ, and definitely not some made-up sci-fi clearance title. But it gets better. Both the ID and the W-2 say Lazar worked for the U.S. Department of Naval Intelligence. Problem? That department hasn't existed since World War II. It was renamed the Office of Naval Intelligence. Not only that, but according to actual declassified documents, Area 51 wasn't under Navy control anyway. It was run by the CIA. And because it was an aircraft testing site, the Air Force. The Navy angle probably came from a rumor that George Knapp's boss, Bob Stoltel, told about a mysterious guy claiming to be from the Naval Intelligence, questioning him about Area 51. And from there, it got twisted around by John Lear, and then again by Bill Cooper, until suddenly, Lazar's repeating it like it's fact. Oh, and Lazar later admitted the badge was fake, but called it a reproduction, as if that somehow makes it less sketchy. He's never retracted the W-2 though, even though it only shows he made $958 for his supposedly top-secret alien tech job. And the employer ID number on it, researchers checked. It doesn't exist in IRS records. But Lazar wasn't just pulling ideals out of thin air. He was pulling them from other UFO personalities. He parroted stuff from John Lear and Bill Cooper about aliens coming from Zeta Reticuli, which had already become a staple of UFO lore by then. Now, you can take that one of two ways. Either Lazar's story backs up those earlier claims, or, more realistically, he was just repeating what he had read and heard, hoping people would think his eyewitness testimony confirmed them. There's actually a trail here. Before Lazar ever went public claiming he worked at S4, he and his buddy, Gene Huff, visited John Lear specifically asking to see his UFO files. They wanted Lear's material on Billy Mayer. You know, the Swiss guy who claimed to be in regular contact with the alien pilots of beam ships since he was 5. The guy who took all those famously fake photos of saucers dangling from strings, some of which still show up in documentaries. One of Mayer's pictures was even used in Lazar's first interview with Knapp to illustrate what the saucers supposedly looked like. That's suspicious. And it doesn't stop there. Lazar's sketches of saucers look strikingly similar to Mayer's beam ships. And Mayer didn't just claim to know what they look like, he also offered his own nonsense explanation of how they worked. His ships, he said, ran on tachyon particles, which supposedly allowed them to travel through time. Lazar seems to have just taken that and swapped in element 115 and gravitational waves to make it sound more science-y. Basically, he cleaned up the sci-fi so it wouldn't sound quite as cartoonish. Or at least he tried. So when you stack it all up, the forged badge, the IRS rejected W-2, the recycled alien lore, the mayor photos, the fast-track clearance claim, what you're left with isn't a whistleblower from a Black Ops alien program. You're left with a guy who knew the UFO mythos really well and decided to insert himself into it. Now let's talk about the last and maybe the most easily debunked of Bob Lazar's claims. The secret facility where he supposedly worked. Not Groom Lake, the main Area 51 site, but a place called S4, located near Papoose Dry Lake, a few miles south and west of Area 51. Lazar said he was bussed out there, and that massive hangar doors camouflaged into the side of a mountain opened up to reveal 9 flying saucers. That's pretty wild already. We have zero solid evidence that any such facility exists, or ever existed, at Papoose Dry Lake. Yes, there is an Area 4, but that's not even in the restricted zone. It's way out past Yucca Flats, smack in the middle of the Nevada Test and Training Range. The closest legitimate thing is a place called Site 4, but that's over 50 miles northeast of Papoose at the Tonopah Test Range, where they teach Air Force pilots electronic warfare. Spoiler, no alien tech involved. Now, let's talk about what is actually out there at Papoose Dry Lake, where Lazar claims people were casually test flying alien spacecraft. For starters, about half of the lake bed isn't even protected by the same restricted airspace as nearby Area 51. If there was a secret underground hangar full of UFOs, the government doesn't seem very concerned about hiding it. Also, and this is key, we have former actual Area 51 employees who worked in security at the site and have gone on record saying there's nothing out there. How do we know they're legit? Their identities were declassified when they sued the federal government in the 90s over health problems caused by exposure to toxic burn pits on site. It was that very lawsuit and the resulting FOIA filings that finally forced the government to admit Area 51 even existed. One of those employees, Fred Dunham, gave interviews confirming that Lazar never signed in at Area 51, something all legitimate employees had to do after flying in on Janet Airlines. Dunham even said the lights Lazar showed Lear back in 1989, just a daily Janet commuter flight. Dunham was clear. There is nothing at Papoose Lake, and there's a good reason for that. The area is still radioactive from old nuclear testing. According to Dunham, you wouldn't build anything there, let alone a secret research base. Then again, that would be the perfect cover story, now wouldn't it? Which brings us to what might be the final nail in the coffin. If Lazar really was working at some facility on Papoose Lake, hanging out on the lake bed during test flights, then he and everyone else working there should have developed cancer by now. And we know that because of Jerry Freeman, an archaeologist who snuck into the area on foot, trying to track down artifacts left by 49er gold prospectors. Freeman claimed to find a chest of old relics, though they were later exposed as fakes, probably planted by Freeman himself. Who else would hike through a radioactive desert just to bury them? But here's the point. Freeman spent a week in and around Papoose Dry Lake. He saw no hangar doors, no installations, no UFOs, nothing. Just a contaminated wasteland. And sadly, not long after his trek, Freeman died of cancer. Even George Knapp, who's profited quite a bit by promoting Lazar, admitted at a conference in Denmark that the area is highly irradiated. Yet instead of reflecting on the implications, Knapp cherry-picked a vague line from Freeman's journal to spin it into something paranormal. Here's what Freeman actually wrote. North of my position, I occasionally caught sight of the Black Hawk helicopter, chasing the tourist away from the Air Force's front door near Groom Lake. That night, as I lay awake in the darkness, high above that ancient playa, I half expected a close encounter of the third kind, but no such luck. Near the mountainous side of Papoose, I saw lights, security vehicles, hangar doors opening and closing. I don't profess to know. That's it. That's the whole thing. Freeman speculated, after dark, and probably exhausted. He didn't see hangars, he didn't see saucers, and it's worth noting he was writing in 1997, after Lazar's hangar door on the mountainside story had already made the rounds. Oh, and Freeman was known to be a hoaxer himself, so maybe don't treat his poetic night journaling as proof of anything. But Knapp wasn't satisfied with vague innuendo. He flat out claimed Freeman saw UFOs emerge from a portal in the sky. At that point, it's just fiction. Which is sadly fitting, because Knapp, more than anyone else, is the reason the world ever heard of Lazar, Lear, or this whole tangled web of half-truth and UFO fanfiction in the first place. Despite all the issues that have been pointed out, George Knapp remains steadfast in his efforts to rehabilitate Bob Lazar's reputation and defend his story. A story that, conveniently enough, Knapp himself has built his media career on. One of Knapp's claims is that Lazar passed lie detector test. But as it turns out, there's more to this than meets the eye. Knapp was actually close personal friends with the polygrapher who administered the test, and when the first one showed signs of deception, the polygrapher just kept testing Lazar until less deception showed up. Talk about bending the truth to fit the narrative. Knapp also claimed that he had gotten other Area 51 employees on record to confirm Lazar's story. Problem is, these additional witnesses have never been named or verified. Then we have the curious case of Jeremy Corbell, Knapp's protege, a former yoga instructor and mixed martial artist turned amateur documentarian. Corbell was initially working on a documentary about Knapp's first UFO whistleblower, John Lear. But after Lear sold the rights to his story, Corbell switched gears and focused on Lazar. Here's the kicker. The documentary barely touches on the major issues with Lazar's story. The only significant problem that gets any mention is the inability to confirm his education and background, which the documentary implies is the result of a cover-up. Researchers who have done the legwork to debunk Lazar reached out to Corbell, offering information to make the documentary more balanced. But it seems that Corbell, just like his mentor Knapp, was more interested in sensationalism and self-promotion than actual journalistic integrity. Knapp and Corbell had parlayed their UFO cover-up conspiracy theory into lucrative careers. They've co-hosted a podcast called Weaponized and appear on Joe Rogan's show, both with and without Lazar. When Lazar eventually landed a book deal for an autobiography, Knapp wrote the foreword. In it, Knapp claimed Lazar had proven his credentials by taking him on a tour of Los Alamos, where people supposedly recognized him. I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound very convincing. Some argue that the Mason Physics facility didn't require a high-level clearance, but it still seems highly unlikely that someone who hadn't worked there for years would be given the freedom to give tours, especially self-guided ones. And filming? Absolutely not. So yeah, this claim about Lazar's Los Alamos tour sounds like another exaggeration in Knapp's attempt to legitimize Lazar. But it's not just Knapp who's been guilty of stretching the truth. Jeremy Corbell has also played fast and loose with the facts. In addition to omitting mountains of evidence that disprove Lazar's story, Corbell has misrepresented statements from sources he cites. Take, for example, the case of newspaperman Terry England and Los Alamos scientist Krangle. Both have denied making the statements Corbell attributed to them. And Mike Thigpen, the person who supposedly confirmed Lazar's security clearance, has denied ever doing so. This isn't just sloppiness. It's a pattern of journalistic dishonesty. So why would they risk their reputations like this? The answer, I think, is pretty clear. Money and self-promotion. George Knapp's career has become almost entirely defined by stories like Lazar's. Sure, he won a Peabody in 2008 for some investigative work unrelated to UFOs, but everything else has revolved around the conspiracy theory industry. Knapp and Corbell might protest that they don't make much from these ventures, but considering the money they make from speaking at UFO conferences and the various projects they produce, we'd be wise to take that with a grain of salt. As for Bob Lazar, he's also made money off this story, despite his claims to the contrary. He sold his Lazar tape in the 90s for $30 a pop, and took a cut of a flying saucer plastic model kit in 1996, and has been paid handsomely for speaking at conferences and making media appearances. It's clear that Lazar has profited from his story, yet another inconsistency in his narrative. The events of Bob Lazar's life continue to be misrepresented by Corbell and Knapp to this day. In their documentary, their big gotcha moment isn't the evidence that the UFOs or aliens are real, but rather that a hand scanner Lazar described was actually in use back then. Lazar claimed the scanner measured bones, but it turns out that the Identimat 2000 scanner, which Lazar described, was publicly known in the 70s, appearing in magazines and even in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Hardly groundbreaking. Lazar regularly cribbed from science fiction, so it's no surprise that he would describe something he had seen before. When Lazar's home and business were raided during the filming of the documentary, Corbell and Knapp seized the opportunity to add yet another layer to the tale, suggesting Lazar had stolen element 115 years ago, and the government was now showing up to reclaim it. In reality, Lazar's company had been raided before for selling explosive compounds, and this time the raid was connected to a murder case where Lazar had unknowingly sold a chemical to a killer who used it to poison someone. But again, facts didn't matter. Knapp and Corbell were more interested in spinning a good story than telling the truth. Now, this should make us cautious about the claims of others in the UFO world, like David Grush, who made similar allegations about reverse engineering alien craft. Despite his credentials and the official channels he went through, his claims offer no more proof than Lazar's did. And just like Lazar, Grush first gained attention with the help of George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell. This is the same old story. Another whistleblower, another set of grand claims, but no actual evidence. As we look back at these UFO whistleblowers over the years, we see a pattern. Figures who make bold claims without substantiating evidence. It's not just Lazar, or Grush, or Lear. It's a whole lineage of individuals whose stories have been promoted by a network of people more interested in profit and self-promotion than in truth. But here's the reminder we can hold on to. In the face of all the lies and deceptions that surround us, the truth is not elusive. In John 14:6, Yeshua said, "I am the way and the truth and the life." The truth will set us free. The world may be full of deception and half-truths, but only Yeshua, the Mashiach, can lead us to the ultimate truth. As we navigate through the maze of conspiracy theories, UFO claims, and other deceptions, we can stand firm in the truth that is found in Him. Remember, behind every fraudster, there are always accomplices and enablers, people who help spread the lies, knowing full well they're feeding the public something far less than the truth. But we don't have to be a part of it, and we don't have to fall for it. We, as believers, when we seek Yeshua, the truth will set us free from all of the distractions and the falsehoods that the world throws our way. I used to believe half of these conspiracy theories. The other half ended up being true. But hopefully, by me babbling on here in Babylon and blowing the whistle on the whistleblowers, you folks listening to this right now won't fall for it. Until next time, may we all continue to seek the light of truth, knowing that in the end, Yeshua is the only one who could lead us out of the darkness.